This is Data.Wave podcast, and my guest is the founder of Hafler Trio, Andrew McKenzie. And it's good to hear you, Andrew, again.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah, so we've been working on Data.Wave since the last year, and it's a pleasure to have you in our crew, so to speak, and it's good that you're a part of us. Actually, it's good that you had an opportunity to contribute and be actually part of Data.Wave.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that it that other people get something out of it. You never know.
Exactly. So the first question that I have for you is actually, well, let's I don't know, we have this test, so to speak, test episode, and let's see how it goes, how it will go. Sure. But my first question is actually, I'm constantly visiting the Hafler Trio page on Facebook, kind of sometimes, in order to see the reaction from other people sometimes. And I recently saw that some people can't figure out what was the conflict or probably the problem between you and Chandra Chakla. He was the person who released an album on Touch like recently, actually.
Oh, I have no idea. Who releases what where these days. But Chandra Shukla is somebody I know from a very long time ago. I have had no contact with him for many years, and at a certain point he wanted to put out a record. And I was in Iceland at the time, and I was about to move from Iceland, out of Iceland, into Estonia. And it was a very confused time to start off with. It's such a long time ago, I don't remember all the details. So I'm not exactly sure what he wanted to put out a record. There was some kind of problem with the way that he wanted to do it, or the way I wanted to do it, or something. I don't remember anymore. And there was some sort of breakdown in communication, and I moved, and I didn't hear any more from him. I actually didn't hear any more. There was no more talk about anything or something. And then I think it was a couple of years ago, somebody told me that there was some kind of weird thing going on Facebook, and apparently he made some sort of death threats to somebody who he thought was me, but I'm not on Facebook. So
and we all know that. we all know that, right? Yeah.
So he thought he was, but apparently, I mean, I know this person who he was talking to. And he forwarded it, and it was it was ridiculous to start off with. I mean, he claimed that he was much tall. He was 2 feet taller than me, which would make him about 8'2", which is, I don't think he's 8'2". And he actually said that, I mean, it was a death threat. It wasn't so. And I don't really know why, all these years later, why somebody would want to kill me. About something which I never heard any more about it, so I don't know. I don't know. But people do things late at night on the internet that they maybe shouldn't. So yeah, maybe it's something to do with that. I don't know. But I don't. Well, yeah, you said what is the problem between me and him, and I don't know. It's as easy as that, really. So.
Yeah. So, how are the things on your side in general? Is everything fine? I always constantly ask the question about your health, because I think that's important, not only for me but also for the people who actually want to know some news about you.
It's a complicated situation, and it's not really worth going into great detail about. But there's a lot of confusion about it, and of course. One of the reasons there's a lot of confusion is because not being officially registered for many, many years with anybody. And so there have been lots and lots of theories, and there's lots and lots of, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, and all the rest of it. But I mean, it's not a good situation, but exactly what it is still not completely clear. And it's very difficult to get, without being part of a system. It's very difficult to actually get, professional advice and information about these kind of things. So it's it's very tricky, and it's not a good situation. I mean, recently there's been some sort of developments which might be a bit more positive, but it's been going on for so long. I mean, nearly 30 years that a lot of things that have been going on are now sort of part of me. They're not. They're no longer like small things that happen and then you can deal with them. When they go on for 30 years, then they become much more difficult to deal with.
Yeah, exactly.
So again, I mean, there's no point in going into great detail about it, but it's not a good situation. But maybe there is some sort of break in it. Part of my problem is, of course, again, not being registered. I mean, the various countries that I lived in, I couldn't get into those systems. And of course, now Brexit now plays a part in this because I still have a British passport.
One of the key roles, actually. Yeah.
And of course, the reason that is so, is because, of course, nobody knows what's happening. I mean, you go to. I mean, recently I had to go to the foreign police to get a new residence card for this country, and
for Estonia.
And so I would ask. I mean, I asked them. I said, "Well, what's going to happen?" And they sort of looked at me with a blank look, and then went off into the corner and spoke to each other, and then came back and said, "Well, actually, we don't know, because it's nobody's done this before." And there aren't any rules or regulations that anybody knows about yet. So it changes week to week, month to month.
I know that it's quite interesting to see you in Estonia. I mean you have been in many post, not many, but in Latvia, for example, a few post Soviet republics. And I mean, how people react to I don't know if I can say the word foreigner, but because it's now banned in California, here in the US, you can say foreigner to people who are
really.
Yeah. Yeah, they passed some regulations, and you can really mention this word. I don't know if it's gonna be officially approved, but it's now really like in their vocabulary. You can use it. You can.
Well, it's not as bad in some countries. The word for foreigner means outsider.
Outsider, yeah.
So, in Japan, for example, gaijin, which means outsider, and in Tibetan, it's also chilokla. So chilokla means outside, and chilowa means outsider. So it means anybody who's not in Tibet is an outsider, and that's the word for a foreigner.
So that's really kind of a stereotype that was built somehow, very very weird stereotype that was kind of built in the roots of some languages.
Same in Icelandic also. There was a while I was still living there was a word came in, a rather unpleasant word for a foreigner which came in. So it kind of, the implication is that you just got off the banana boat or something. It's
oh my God,
it's not a nice word. And also in Japan, and the Tibetan thing's not quite so bad, except they also have another word for foreigners, which is inji, which is their word for English person, because the first people they saw who were foreign people who came into Tibet in like late 1800s were English people, and they were the people, apart from people in India, but the first white people they saw were from England. And the word, one of the words for foreigner actually means blonde-haired person, because they were the first people they'd seen who had blonde hair.
Oh.
So, yeah.
Well,
so,
so what do you think about all these stereotypes in these languages, and actually how do people react to you in Estonia? I mean, do they have this post-Soviet kind of, way of thinking, and or they actually react pretty well, that you feel like, oh yeah, I really thought it's going to be that good?
Okay, well, that's a two-part question. So the first thing is the whole idea of the outsider or the foreigner as outsider is just fear. So it's sort of fear of the unknown. And of course, just like with all of these things, if you're not prepared to open the door and let the light in, of course it's going to be frightening. So I lived through, I mean, I'm old enough to remember in the late 60s when a lot of people from Jamaica and India and Pakistan came to England, and it was exactly the same language, exactly the same attitude. And now, of course, with the Brexit thing, people have been basically thrown out of the country and all the rest of it. But the fact remains is that all the people who came in the 1960s into England were the people who, just like in every other country, they do the jobs that the British people didn't want to do. So they ended up becoming the backbone of the whole country. They had shops open when nobody else would open them. They would, they had a different work ethic, and they would do jobs that other people wouldn't do. And the same is true when the Turkish people came into Germany. The same is true of when in Iceland there were many, many Polish people came in because they were, when Poland tried to join the European Union, then Iceland was the first country that would let them come there. So in a country at that time, a country of around about 250,000 people, there were 6,000 Polish people, which is a big percentage. And exactly the same thing happened. They did all the jobs that all the Icelandic people didn't want to do. And the same is true now of Estonia, because they never had. I mean, why would you move to Estonia? There was no reason. And now, of course, there are foreign people here. So the attitude has changed since I first came here. And of course, Estonia is now much more of a European country than it was when I first came here. It's 30 years ago since it was part of the Soviet Union, and there's a couple of generations basically of people who don't remember that. So their attitude towards foreign people has changed. So young people, of course, like all of this Western stuff, and some of the older people are still a bit living in the past, let's say. Mm-hmm. So just like in Germany, you have people who wish the wall would come back. And
you really think there's some kind of people who really want that still?
Oh, lots of people,
Oh, really?
Lots of people. Yeah. Well, my experience is, I mean, I was in Germany when the wall came down. I was in Hamburg, and I remember what the mood was. And what happened was that, I mean, this is a generalization, but I mean, in East Germany, they basically partied for about a year after the wall came down, and they woke up with an enormous hangover. And then they suddenly realized, oh, what are we going to do? Because in the previous time, they didn't have to think about where they were going to work. Well, it was like, no, you work there. And they didn't have to think about where they were going to live. No, you live there, And then suddenly, as soon as the wall came, and of course, there's a lot of people who wish that they didn't have these responsibilities. And so they would like it to be where they were taken care of. And like I say, there's now generations of people who remember when, without wanting to step on too many toes, but I mean, they remember when the Soviet Union was a big, strong thing. And, they want to go back to those days, and they want to remember when Germany was, this divided country, but then there was a sense of identity, because a lot of this stuff comes down to a sense of identity. Do you belong to this gang or that gang? And it's a teenage kind of obsession, nationalism and identification with one tribe or another tribe. And so just like in a tribal society, you fear and suspect the people in the other tribe. So, and it's encouraged. It's encouraged with all sorts of all sorts of situations, not just social media, but I mean, a large part of it is that you're no longer an individual, you are a brand, and your brand fits in with other people's brands. And if you identify with that particular brand, then so many things are taken care of for you. You don't have to think about what records you listen to, or what clothes you wear, or what music, whatever. It's all taken care of. It's all pre-planned. So this is a way of, in my mind anyway, this is a way of getting security in a world which, more and more is less and less secure. We don't have the church to fall back on anymore. We don't have the state to fall back on anymore. We don't, there's no trust in even things like the family or any of that kind of stuff. So what do you fall back on? Well, you fall back on what you did in your teenage years is your gang.
Yeah, especially here, like in the US, like nobody really trusts anybody. There's no even you can really have friends here as well. So it's really it's from my personal experience because I had a really interesting story. I even made a post. I don't know why, but I was very kind of a little bit disappointed in people. But I went to a record store. To the rough trade store and here in New York, and I was literally kicked off from the store. Not kicked off, but people were just like, well, you're a little bit too annoying because you started recommending vinyl to our customers, and it's our priority to do this kind of job. I was like, okay. Yeah, I know it's illegal to talk about music in the music store. Yeah, that's really true. That's really true. So people really, I guess, the problem is that they're too strict and they have their rules and their minds, and they just can't analyze anymore. Realistically,
no, well,
I guess in the other way of thinking, they can build another system in the brain. I guess I don't know what's the real problem here, but
I think it's several. I don't think it's one particular thing. I think it's several. It's a combination of a lot of different things, and one of them is the fear of missing out. There are so many things to look at and there are so many things to be part of, and you have to know about them all, that of course the only thing you can do is you can only know any of these things superficially. You don't have any time to look at anything in depth. And in fact, after a long period of living like that, you don't really have very much of a capacity to actually investigate things in depth. It's something that is not encouraged. It's not. There's no reward for that. There's a lot of social reward for knowing about this tiniest little thing that's going on in every single aspect of that particular gang. So there's no motivation to do that, and there isn't space to do that. There isn't time or space to do that, and it's also not socially approved. To be superficial is rewarded. I mean, it happens in different countries in different ways, but the idea of a deep relationship with another person is kind of, well, I don't agree with them this week, so you just unfriend them, or you can now dispose of people in a very, very easy way, and you never need to speak to them again or hear from them again.
Yeah,
and that kind of
if you don't want to talk to anybody, you will just do as you do. You just write them one letter A, and that's it.
Well, the one letter A. Yeah, and this is the people don't know the value of things. They know, like Oscar Wilde said, they know about critics. They know
great you mentioned that.
They know the price of everything and the value of nothing. So it's I
guess as more as you have, as more as you're disappointed in something, right?
Well, you only get disappointed if you expect things. So, so people will take the easy way out, and of course you can't blame them for wanting them to be safe, for them wanting things to be predictable, because everything else around them is not that way. So the first thing that happens with a computer system of all different types, whether it's a phone or a computer or whatever, is it gives the illusion of controllability. It gives the illusion that everything is going to be in the same place all the time. So you go to this particular menu in this particular program, and the choices will all be laid out for you, and it'll all be there every time and in the same way. Right? And so it gives this illusion that the world is controllable in this way. And this little box is the safe, controllable place where the world is understandable, and it is controllable, and it is predictable, and occasionally things will go wrong, but you can fix them with version 2.0. So this what has happened is that people spend so much time with these systems, that they end up believing that the outside world, or the world which is not in the computer, behaves this way too. And of course it doesn't. It's messy, and there are no answers to everything. There are no answers at the back of the book. There is no version 2.0. And unfortunately, you have whole generations of people now who've been trained that the real world is actually in the computer, and the other stuff is just a mess. Which,
yeah, that was pretty much, everybody discussed that, really. Yeah. This whole idea. But I want to mention something as well, because we have this opportunity to talk, actually. And yeah, I recently also went to this NFT gallery, this whole popular new kind of stuff.
Yes.
It's called NFT. And I was also disappointed twice, because there's such a collapse of morals in terms of well, I guess it's okay to actually, show the genitals of human genitals on the in your art pieces, kind of. But I was a little bit too disappointed, because there's no such thing as high art anymore. High art. There's only this idea of collapse of morals, and it's unavoidable. It's unavoidable, unfortunately.
It's a bit too soon, but maybe it's probably just a phase, that an in-between phase or something.
Probably the problem is because it's for a massive audience, and masses are always
sure.
Masses are always the fans of very superficial thing. Yeah.
It's easily digestible, and again, you don't have to do much work for it, and one look and you're done. And that's all. I mean, nobody knows how to read a painting anymore. They probably don't know how to really read books anymore. So, but again, these things go in waves. They go in cycles, and who knows? Nothing ever completely disappears. The kind of, I've lived long enough to see things I never thought would come back, and yet they do. There are whole generations now of people who are madly excited and interested in the minutiae, the very small things that went on when I was doing all this crazy stuff in the 70s and the 80s. And now there are generations of people who want to know about it, and there are histories being written which are, just utterly unbelievable when I look at them. But just the most ridiculous thing that happened then is now held up to be vitally important, and it wasn't at the time, and even the people making it didn't think it was that important, and now it's put on a gold pedestal as if it was something very important. But this is what happens when there are movements. And every time there's a new development in technology, every time there's a new development in this, what happened before becomes high art. So if you look at the history of, these kind of things, like, for example, radio was looked upon as something that for the masses and for ordinary people to be entertained and also to get the news. And then when television came along, radio suddenly became art. When film first came out, it was meant to entertain the masses. The working people would go and see these short films on their day off or whatever it was, and they'd be entertained. And then as soon as television came along, film became high art. And then when television, so film was never, an art form. there were people making things that are now considered to be art, but they weren't originally. And then we have the internet, which then turned television into art. I mean, television was the most basic thing that everybody had, and nobody took it seriously. And now soap operas and things that were complete trash when they first came out are now seen to be high art, and so on and so forth.
So there's the cyclical process.
Yeah, very much
taking place. Yeah.
So
let's.
Carry on.
Yeah. I agree with you, and I guess the problem here is also that the things don't change as well. It's going cyclical for a long period of time already. So you mentioned radio, you mentioned TV, and was almost like a century, and it goes cyclically in a cyclical process.
Sure.
For a century already.
Well, I mean, even recently, I mean, when I lived for Latvia for about 3.5 years, and
so you lived in Latvia, and then you moved to Iceland again, and then
no. I lived from Iceland. I went to Estonia. From Estonia, I went to Latvia. From Latvia, I went back to Estonia
again. Oh yeah.
So
there was a cyclical process too. In your
case. kind of.
Yeah. Continue.
So I lived in Latvia for about 3.5 years, and when I lived in the middle of nowhere, the nearest town was about 10 kilometers away. And when I used to go there, I used to have to get the bus, and the bus used to cross a train line, and there was a sign warning you that trains were about to come, and it was a drawing of a steam train. Yeah.
Oh.
Now, who these days has seen a steam train running along, right? I mean, running along a track. I mean, almost nobody. If you look at your computer, if you look at your Skype right now, you'll see the symbol for making a call is a telephone. But that telephone, I mean, how many young people have seen a telephone like that these days? Well, almost nobody. If you look at the symbol for sending email, it's an envelope. So
I guess we will surprise the young generation by saying that you can use an envelope in order to send a letter.
Yeah.
Things are going cyclical pretty much. So I mean, it's unavoidable to discuss the death of Richard Kirk, which I guess if you don't want to discuss this topic, we can avoid that.
No, it's fine.
But but what do you personally think of that? I mean, is the industrial era gone officially, or do you think there was
with him? No. I mean, he was obviously very, very, very important. Sure, but I mean, just because he died, I suppose you could say he died young, but I mean, for a lot of people, it wasn't unexpected. He wasn't exactly the world's healthiest man. And I mean, I'm not giving away any secrets when I say that. He was very, this ridiculous word, influential. I mean, he was.
Oh yeah. I really hate this word.
But it's, a lot of people wouldn't be doing what they do now if it hadn't been for him. You could say that. I mean, I think that's fair to say. He was. I've been saying for many years, that there should be a coffee table book of the sayings of Richard H. Kirk, because he was a very, very funny man. And he used to say the most outrageous things and do the most outrageous things that other people probably wouldn't be able to get away with. He was. I don't think they make people like that anymore.
The generation is gone, right?
Well, he was. Even his best friends would tell you that he was extremely stubborn and extremely hard to get on with at times because there were various influences, shall we say.
The very influences.
Well, there used to be a joke that kids today don't take drugs because Keith Richards took them all in the 60s. And you could say that about Richard, for the 80s and the 90s, basically. So,
or I also heard one other story. Nobody remembers the 70s because why do you like the 70s? Oh, because nobody remembers them.
well, yeah. Well, they used to say that if you remember the 60s, you weren't there.
Yeah. I guess it's the same phrase, but
it's the same thing. It's
the same phrase.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I mean there are books coming out now, and there are people I know, and they remember periods where I'm sure they actually don't remember those periods. I'm sure they don't. There's no way they could possibly remember those periods. But there was a lot of that went on. I mean, a lot of extreme stuff went on. But one of the things, it's a double-edged sword. Richard was very, very stubborn, and I am in my own. I mean, I am also. But there's the other side of that coin. The other name for stubborn is persistent. Which is not a negative term. Stubborn is a very negative term, and persistent is a very positive term. So but it's the same thing. So you can look at it in two different ways. So Richard stuck very much to what he, and you can admire that, but you can also find it a problem. So it depends on you, not him, whether you think that he was stubborn or whether he was very persistent. I mean, he stuck to what he believed, and he did the same thing. I mean, he basically did what he wanted to do for a very, very long time. And he didn't, except for a very brief period, he basically didn't listen to what anybody else said. So you can either see that as being very positive, or you can see that as being very difficult. It's
to deal with.
It's not his problem. And it wasn't his problem when he was alive, and it's not his problem now. So, but he was, he did, when all three of them were together, of course, they came up with some quite groundbreaking things, I suppose you could call it. I mean, I don't think there's a lot of it has not aged very well. I think it was a lot more interesting then. There were there are certain things they did but everybody's like that, So, and like all the products in a supermarket, some things, they all have a date on them, right?
Yeah.
And some things last longer than others, and that's the way it is. So it's not a criticism. It's actually, to think that everybody's work is all valuable for all time is just ridiculous as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, when people die, there is a tendency to do that, is to frame everything as if it all came from the same source and was consistent. And of course, there's nobody I can think of who produced 100% all the time, and that's not a bad thing.
So you mentioned the idea of products in the supermarket. So you think we are products, or the general the works of people are products?
I think ideas have a sell by date. And
the expiration date.
Yeah, I think they do. I mean, philosophical ideas are a bit like this. You can look at certain philosophies and you can see why this or that idea was an extremely important idea at this particular time, but it wouldn't have the same effect today. And I'm thinking specifically of the whole Gurdjieff thing, where a whole part of the Gurdjieff teaching is that people should receive shocks at certain points in certain processes. Now, the things that shocked people when Gurdjieff was alive, when he was really active in St. Petersburg and around that sort of 1910 period, the kind of things that would shock people then are not the things that would shock people now. So
there was a different processes going on, right?
Well, yes, and the kind of shock that people were interested in doing during the punk era and afterwards, these things are commonplace now. I remember even 20 years ago, there was a kind of cocktail wine bar in New York City that used to play Throbbing Gristle. So, and you can't, I can't, that's extremely difficult for me to imagine, but these days, actually, that's, but eventually these things become, cut-ups. Every film soundtrack these days has some sort of cut-up on it, and the editing is, you look at a film from the 1920s and 30s and you can't even imagine that kind of editing going on. All these things that were very shocking are no longer commonplace. The kind of soundtracks that are on the average Hollywood film would not be out of place in the 1970s on some obscure industrial record label. The kind of things that people get Grammys for and Oscars for, this would have been completely unacceptable 30, 40 years ago. It's just too weird. But unfortunately, these days, what was weird is now just atmosphere or something like that,
Yeah. And also, if we actually all analyze, we can realize that that even Autechre is becoming a pop music.
It eventually everything becomes assimilated. So you either work with that, or you just sort of throw up your hands and go, well, there's nothing I can do about it. I mean, knowing Autechre a bit, the way I do, I mean, I think they're a mixture of both. I mean, but you can't, you can look at anything. I mean, surrealism.
Surrealism. Yeah.
When surrealism first came out, it was shocking, deeply, deeply shocking to people. And now it's used just by every single advertiser you can imagine. Surrealism is just part of your artistic canvas if you're making some kind of advert for something. It's not shocking.
It became an instrument in the hands of smart marketing people.
Yeah, but and in Riga, there's a shopping mall in Riga, and it's called Cafe Dada, and it's actually it is shopping mall, right? And it's got Dada lettering for its sign, and it has one of those signs with a hand pointing, and it's you see, Dada was even more violently threatening than surrealism, and yet it's now a cafe, an ordinary cafe in a shopping mall in Riga. So
looks like people don't know what they're doing, because it's like, oh, it looks nice. Let's just point. Let's make a label and
sure.
let's try to use this
sure
aspect, a huge aspect of the world culture for our ordinary coffee shop. Yeah.
And this is the way of it. There's nothing you can. It's completely futile to rage against it and say, well, because there's nothing you can do about it, because it's much bigger than you are. You're never going to be able to fight against this. So why bother? I mean, why not just my reply would be, you just carry on doing what you actually need to or want to, or and the rest be damned. It doesn't really matter. If you think it matters, then you've made a big mistake. I think.
So you just continue to believe in you still trust in your beliefs, right? But you don't fight against it.
Well, my own personal opinion is that it has to go beyond belief. If you believe in something, then you're kind of telling yourself a story about what is right and what is wrong. At a certain point, if you are really working with whatever it is you're working with, and that can be sweeping a street or it can be decorating the Sistine Chapel, it doesn't matter. If your motivation is right, is correct, then you don't have a choice. You don't need to believe in it. It's simply something you have to do. That's it. And there are no questions and there is no discussion. And that, of course, is the opposite of what people normally call freedom, which is chaos. When people talk about, my freedom is valuable, what they mean is they want the right to have total chaos. True freedom is actually when you don't have to choose. It's when you know exactly what you've got to do. There is no question. And it's a bit of a sort of a thing that people will think is politically incorrect and all that. But actually what most people mean is they want to have infinite choice to what they want to do, but they have no way of choosing. They don't know how to choose anything anyway. So it just becomes random. Or it becomes they will choose the thing that all their friends do, or they will choose the thing that looks like it's going to cause the least trouble. They don't make the decisions based on any kind of moral structure, ethical structure, any of that kind of stuff. They do it because they get married to people because they have a nice haircut. They choose a house because it feels right, and it reminds them of the inside of some pop star's house.
But you know what? Even sapiosexuality became a trend, I guess.
Yes, of course. Well, what's left?
What's left? Exactly.
So you have to eventually it'll come around. Of course it's got to. Sure.
Yeah.
And again, that goes in waves. If you look at in medieval times, a lot of that kind of stuff was going on then anyway. So it's not really anything new. And again, that's another thing. This pressure that everything has to be new and different, and there has to be progress. This word which is sort of like the carrot before the donkey of Western science and Western culture, is that we have to have progress, and things have to get better and bigger and faster, and all the rest of it. While all the time in traditional societies they look back to the beginning of everything, and then they try to copy that, because in the beginning it was perfect, and there's no need for progress. And actually, progress is completely the wrong direction. So,
exactly.
I mean, that's the way it is. And this idea that everything will get better in the future is the perfect trick to get people to not be satisfied with now. And if you're not satisfied with now, and it's always going to be, you're going to get a better job, you're going to get better circumstances, you're going to get more money, you're going to get a better partner, it's all going to get better, but it's never now. It's always in the future. And you've always got to earn more money to get more stuff. You've always got to get the newest thing, the newest upgrade. Otherwise, you're not a good person.
But we need to concentrate on now, actually. That's the best way to...
Well, without again, it's become that whole thing has become a cliche.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole nowness thing, but it's the only time you've got.
Yeah.
You don't have any of the other stuff.
So you think even if it's a cliche, we still need to be concentrating on the present time, right?
Well,
because
it's not
that's
just
the only choice.
It's not just a question of concentrating on what is happening now. It's also the way that you see it. So it's no good concentrating on now if you have all these filters in the way, right? You're seeing it through the wrong end of the telescope, and there's a whole bunch of philosophies and practices and all of it which have to do with this idea that you're not seeing things as they are. You're seeing things the way that you want them to be, or you expect them to be, and you shape the reality of what you see and what you hear and what you feel and what you sense. You shape that to form the preconceptions that you already have. So you're editing reality to fit the boxes that you have already prepared for it. And so concentrating on now in that sense doesn't really help you very much. So the stuff I'm talking about is there are ways, and they take practice. They are not something that you're not born with this. These are things, mental muscles or even spiritual muscles that you can develop in order to be able to see things with less filters than you have now. Because the amount of different perspectives that you have is limited by your culture, by your language, by the belief system that you grow up in. And all these kind of things are filtering reality for you. If you don't have a word for something, then you won't see it, because you have no way to hold on to that thing. So in some cultures, as you know, having grown up and, you have a different first language, that there's certain concepts which are not in other languages that you have in other languages, right?
Yeah.
There are some things you cannot translate, right? And so those concepts shape the way that you think about things. It's the way you perceive the world. It's the way that you hold on to the world is by the concepts which are embedded in the language that you know. So most Western languages are based on Aristotelian logic. That is to say, things are either this thing or not this thing. Therefore, they can't be both. So we have
very reasonable logic, right?
But logic is not the only game in town. So Aristotelian logic limits your way of perceiving the world into something is something, or it is not that thing. And it makes you think of the world in terms of yourself and something which is not you. Whereas in reality, those divisions are actually constructed. They're not there. So we see differences and we make separations where those separations are not. And so they don't. And the way to find this out is to learn a language which is far away from the culture that you come from. So if you grow up in England, if you learn Tibetan or Japanese or Chinese, you will find out that actually they don't see the world that way. And actually the way you see the world is determined by the concepts which are embedded in your language. But the old McLuhan thing is like, we don't know who wrote the first book about water, but we know it wasn't a fish. So if you are in an element and you don't experience anything else, then you will see the world that way. And
so the whole idea of perception changes in your mind after you learn the language and you just start.
Hopefully.
Your box, which is a brain, becomes bigger a little bit.
Yeah. And you see different perspectives. And if you only see an object, an ordinary object, if you only see it from one angle, you must have had the experience where you see something from a different angle, and my God, it's a completely different object. And the more perspectives you have on something, the more complete a picture you have. And they may be perspectives you don't like. That's that's one of the things, is that we won't take the perspective that we don't like because we don't like it. But if we were to take that perspective, we would see things in a very different way, which would actually help us understand a great deal. And this resistance to doing things we don't like stops us from actually understanding why we don't like them.
And it sounds very logical, it sounds very very logical and reasonable at the same time.
I used to do an exercise when I was working in a record shop in Newcastle when I still lived in England, and across the way from this record shop, which was in a shopping mall, there was a shop called W.H. Smith's, which is it sold newspapers and magazines and all sorts of other things. And I used to make it an exercise that five times a week I would buy a magazine about something I knew nothing about. So, and I would read it. So, and the amazing stuff that would come out of reading these things, where I had no preconception, I had no idea
what it's all about.
Yeah, like Pig Farmers Weekly, for example, or another one was about crochet, and another one was about fishing, and another one. Every week there would be some new, some subject I had and the amount that you will learn from this, but you wouldn't go there logically. You see, this is why logic is so useless for going forwards, is because you're only looking for what you can understand logically.
But it's very difficult. It's very difficult to keep the interest in your mind and fight against laziness, because you always have to have this this interest in your mind and be always ready to perceive new information.
Absolutely. Well, there's two aspects to that, and one is that there are practices that you can do which can develop this, and the second thing is that you can that curiosity is something that you can actually grow, if you see the reason for it. You see, the problem is if you don't have a reason to do it, then of course you won't do it. But if you have a motivation for it, which is to take, it's not just new information you're after seeing the world in a different way, which will allow you to do whatever the purpose is that you have. If you only limit it to collecting new information, then you have, the standard thing where people's hard drives are full of information they will never ever see. I remember when I worked in Denmark and we had a company. This is the early days of the internet, and we had to investigate offices and to see why they were using large amounts of internet. And this was because people in the background of their offices were downloading, many things. And we used to have to go onto these hard drives, and we used to have to clean them up. Now, I'm talking about, easily 20, 25 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then we did a calculation, and the calculation was that if we took these songs that the typical office worker had on their hard drive, and they started listening 24 hours a day, they wouldn't live long enough to hear it all. So, and now it's much worse. So now it's not just music. I mean, it's film, movies, it's books, it's like everything. And there's no way that the average person is going to ever read, listen, or watch a fraction of that stuff.
Yeah.
No way.
So do you think many people actually are asking about when does the Hafler Trio tracks will be available on digital platforms besides Bandcamp? So do you think it will ever happen that you will open YouTube and you will see some albums available? Why do you have this eternal problem fighting for the rights? Because nobody is there's some problem there, right?
Well, the thing that a lot of people don't realize is actually most of it's not me taking this stuff down. It's actually the publisher, Freibank. So,
oh, really?
That's yeah. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, of course, people never ask. And actually, maybe I would be a bit more, open to it if people actually wrote to me and said, "Hey, listen, I would like to put this up on YouTube. What do you think?" But
there's no feedback.
Nobody's ever done it. Nobody has ever asked me. Not ever. And there are these things, these MP3 blogs. And some years ago, there was one of these things, and it was putting my stuff up. And I said, politely, I have to say, in the beginning, I was polite, and I said, look, I don't want this stuff up there. And I gave my reasons, because it's separated from the artwork, the whole thing. It's like, okay, would you please take it down? And then they got but we're giving you publicity. Oh, we're doing you a favor, etc., which are just completely ridiculous reasons.
I'm giving the publicity to myself, right, Andrew?
Like, why would what good is that going to do me? Well, none. And so I said, okay, look, if I make something specially for this format, specially for this thing, and I work with this, with the situation, and I make a special release for this, will you take the other stuff down? And I won't charge you any money for it. I will give you this thing, and, will you promote it in the same way? No, they wouldn't do it. Mm-hmm. So I gave them the opportunity. I said, look, I will do this quite, and it'll be a special thing. It'll be a new way to use this medium, and I'll make it, I'll work with this medium and do something special for it. No, they'd rather just take the original stuff and put it out there because they're doing me a favor and giving me the publicity. So nobody can say I didn't try,
At least you tried to negotiate to find some.
Yes, and all I got was
on a common sense basis.
Yeah. So all I got was insults. So the answer to your question is, well, maybe one day, if the whole situation changes to a situation where you can present it in a very rich way. I mean, we don't have that. We still don't have a medium where it can be properly, where this material can be properly displayed. I mean, I'm not saying that what I do is better than anybody else's, but it needs a different situation. It's not something you can reduce to just a sound file, because it's not about that. The text and the cover and the images and stuff are all a part of it. It's not something it's not part of it. It's not what other people do. Maybe it's just songs, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that what I do is just it's just not that. That's all. So maybe one does. Yeah.
A little bit more complex, right? Structure.
It has a bit more to it. Let's say, in a different way, not better way, in a different way. So one of the things I am going to do, I hope I'm going to be able to do, is a soap opera. So it'll be possible to just watch this on an ordinary computer and stuff, because it's not meant to be seen on a big screen as some big cinematic thing. It will be like a soap opera, which is not really meant to be worth anything big. It's just, every month there'll be just a new episode of this ridiculous story. So so that would be one thing. But otherwise, no, not the old stuff which is suited to being like it is on Bandcamp now, and there's not very much more of that is possible. So,
So let's discuss, in order to kind of end our discussion, our first episode, our first, let's discuss the two records that you had an opportunity to review. What you wrote about it, but it's always good to hear something oral, something like in an oral form. What do you think of the signed record and interreferences from Richard Chartier? What are your thoughts?
Right. Well, okay. The thing to me, the most important thing, and it's not the same for everybody. My whole thing about doing a review of a record, or actually giving an opinion about a record or a piece of artwork or whatever it happens to be, is the most important thing is to examine what the intention was. If I just look at something or listen to something or watch something or whatever, and I just judge it by what I think it should have been, then I'm not a very good reviewer. It's just more noise. But if I take the time to try and examine it and find out what was the person trying to do, what was their motivation, and what was the effect they were trying to create, and where did they think it would lead to? These are important things to me. And because I know the Autechre people, I have a kind of an idea about what they're about and stuff like that. And it's not so much what it reminds me of. It's not so much about what I think, what software they used, or any of this kind of stylistic thing or technical thing. It's what effect they intended to have. And did they succeed with that or not? I don't think it's valid to criticize anybody if they achieved the effect they were, even if you don't like it. If they achieved the effect that they set out to achieve, that's success. I mean, to me. Right? So if they decided to piss you off and you get pissed off, that's a success. If if their intention was to make you relax and you got relaxed, well, there we are.
The goal was reached.
The goal was reached. And even if you don't like it and you don't agree with it, they did what they set out to do, and you have to respect that, I think. So with the Autechre things, to talk about their motivation is obviously wrong, because I don't know exactly. I have an idea. And I think that I think generally what they do, they succeed in doing what they want to do. And I don't think that they have the intention. Their first intention is not about other people. Their first intention is about themselves. So the other people, although they don't, it's not a put down of other people, but they're primarily thinking of what it means to them. And then if other people are interested, then great. They're not making records for other people. They're making records that they would probably be making the records whether they had an audience or not. So, and there are a number of people like that I either know or know of, and they would be doing stuff even if nobody else was listening, because they're fulfilling a need that they see that nobody else is supplying. So, or they're not supplying it in a way that they believe. White House is like that. William Bennett would be, even if he had no electricity, he'd be banging two rocks together. He would still be doing this. Whether you like him or not, he would still be doing it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter in the slightest. And William is definitely that kind of person.
What about Richard Chartier, the second and actually the last record you had an opportunity to review?
Well, I think what he's doing, as far as I understand it, I think he's achieving his aim. But I think as far the other part of that is, I don't think his aim is very precise. I think it's a very general aim. I don't think it's a very specific aim. So a part of what he's doing is a little bit lost because it isn't quite focused in a way that maybe it would be better for him to do. I don't know. I don't know him personally. Years ago I had a little bit of contact with him through the mail, but I haven't had any contact with him for many years, so I don't really know. But I think he's I think part of what he's doing is experimenting in public as well. So I think he does. I think he succeeds in what he's doing. The only, I can't call it a problem, but the only sort of the point where I would want to talk to him about it is that if his focus was a bit sharper, maybe then
not too general, right? Not too general.
Not so diffuse.
Diffuse
would be how I would put it. If it was a bit more focused, then maybe he would be able to go to places that would be more interesting for him as well as for other people. Although interesting is maybe not the word he would want to have in there. But that's my whole feeling. That's my whole feeling about it. Is that it would be interesting to see him do something which was razor sharp focused. And it may be that he's actually already done that, and I'm not aware of it. But this particular record, that's what I felt could have benefited from that, because it would have taken it into areas that he's not familiar with. And it's always interesting to hear artists deal with unfamiliar situations. Like
we said about the magazines, right?
Yeah. Exactly. So whenever you get somebody who has integrity, which obviously Mr. Chartier does. I mean, I'm not saying he doesn't for a second. Then it's always interesting to hear them on the edge. It's always interesting to hear them dealing with situations that they're a bit surprised by, and seeing how they handle it. And that's what I find very interesting, and what it's possible to learn from them. Rather than them being comfortable, where you don't really learn very much from them. I mean, it can be, you don't have to learn from everything, but for me, that's what I was kind of missing, is that element of him being surprised, not me being surprised, but him being surprised, which may have been, I mean, maybe he's surprised, but he's not being, there's no big surprise happening there. He may be surprised by what turns out, by what he's doing, but it doesn't sound like it's a big shock, and it's healthy once in a while to have that,